Hi, everybody, and welcome. Today we are talking about cybersecurity with Joe Russell from Briesen and Roper. Thank you, Joe, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Any questions today, you should be able to contact Joe or myself or Marcy Rainbolt at the Counties Association, and we are happy to get you any answers. And I have nothing left, so Joe, I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Chelsea. So as Chelsea was speaking, my black lab just started nudging me to pet her. So I apologize if you hear some dog noises. I don't think I need to explain that is one of the challenges of working remotely. So if you have pets, we not only have a black lab, but our daughter recently got a rabbit, which the black lab does not really like. So let's see if we can get through this without dog barking. But why don't we start back with these COVID-19 presentations. You've probably seen a fair number of them thus far. I've been involved in a fair number as well. If you can believe it, last week I did a 3-hour Zoom recording regarding civility and diversity in the legal profession in 2020. And that was fairly specific on the incivility, the snippy emails, the scheduling disputes that lawyers are having in the year of COVID-19 because clients want to move their cases along, but courts, like many other public institutions, aren't fully open to the public. As a lawyer, I'm a litigator at Von Briesen and Roper, so I'm often in court. And it has been a challenge trying to do these things remotely when, in particular, jury trials cannot be scheduled. So I did that last week. This upcoming week, we actually are defending some counties in a federal lawsuit that was brought on behalf of a lot of plaintiffs throughout the state of Wisconsin who are claiming that local health orders, public health orders are violating their constitutional rights, mass gatherings, religious worship, ability to circulate petitions. I'm actually doing a presentation on that this upcoming week. So lots of COVID presentations. Hopefully these are interesting to you, and hopefully this one will be interesting to you. When I accepted the invitation to speak on cyber breach and security concerns, that was back in February, where COVID-19, I don't even think I had heard the term, it was coronavirus. It was yet to be a grave concern in the US. It was obviously coming to the US through China. I think Italy was experiencing a real spike, but we were caught somewhat flat-footed, I think, as a country, and that includes cyber security, where cyber criminals and hackers saw a great opportunity in hacking into and violating the cybersecurity of various Americans and institutions. So when we started, the presentation was originally just cyber breach and security concerns, and now I've added the COVID-19 context to it. I think March 24th or March 23rd was the time we were supposed to be in Stevens Point, where I was going to do this in person. It was March, I think, 17th, where our law firm started closing down. That's in downtown Milwaukee. I think mid-March was really the time where things shifted. So unfortunately, I can't be there with you in person. I'm used to talking to myself and seeing myself now on these Zoom recordings. It is somewhat tiresome. I like the collaborative experience, the questions and answers and that sort of thing. But I'll do my best to be entertaining while I stay here at home. My family just left to go up north, where there aren't as many restrictions, and I'm left here with my dog. So enough about me. Why don't we start with our topic? The first slides will be about smart devices, outsmarting humans. And I'll go over the agenda a little bit so you know what's coming. So there are obviously challenges working remotely. IT departments you work with have been doing yeoman's work trying to make sure that people are productive. And meanwhile, there are spiking security risks. The cyber criminals and hackers are very active now. They are preying on the vulnerabilities people are feeling when they click on stuff that they shouldn't be. So we'll go over some of the lures that they're using to get you to click on things that might install malware, that sort of thing. And then what's the current, the new threat profile as opposed to the old? What are some of the government resources that you can avail yourself of? The FBI and FCC in particular has a lot of good information on scams to be aware of during COVID-19. Surviving a breach, what happens when there is a data breach? What do you do right away? What are the US laws? How are the US laws going to affect your ability to respond to a breach? Examining security as a general matter. Costs associated with breaches can be costly, especially if they're larger in size. Forensic investigators, if you have to notify lots of people, then that's going to cost money because that's going to go through the mail. Preparing for a breach, responding to a breach, investigation of a breach and remediation, and then notification requirements, and then post-breach lessons learned, best practices, and that sort of thing. So let's go to our first slide here, which is right in front of you, Outsmarting Humans. So it really is remarkable. I mean, you'll see these kind of percentages anywhere you look on the internet, that 90% of the world's data is generated in the last 2 years. It's kind of hard to quantify that, I think, exactly. We might be talking about a few percentage points either way, but it really is remarkable considering that computers have been around as long as they have been, that cell phones have been around as long as they have been. I went to law school in about 20 years ago. So when I graduated, Palm Pilots were still kind of a thing. And my law firm was also into BlackBerries. And I'm not sure if you ever had a BlackBerry, but it was pretty much working from home 24 hours a day, where you were expected to respond to client requests, partner requests, no matter when, whether you're tired, sleepy, sick, etc., if you're at family gatherings, weddings. And that's been, it's been an issue because I do ethics CLEs for lawyers, and people get upset when they have to respond at all hours of the day and in various conditions. So first of all, don't just a matter of etiquette, and we're going to talk about cyber hygiene, but if you're emailing or clicking on things on your work computer when you're tired, angry, mad, if you've been drinking, bad things tend to happen. So whenever I'm on the computer, my work computer, or responding to emails, I imagine myself like I am today with a tie, at least a jacket on, collared shirt. And that so far, but for the grace of God go I, has been working for me. But there are plenty of horror stories about people emailing things or clicking on things that they shouldn't be when they're angry or they're in compromised situations. So when adding smart devices to your personal life, and we're talking not just about cell phones, fitness trackers are very popular, home security systems, other smart devices, a lot of appliances, they're gonna continue to come at you, all these smart devices. Consider the risks involved when you buy those devices, and consider the risks when you plug them in to your various computers. If possible, with these smart devices, enable the maximum security settings available on them so they aren't easily hacked. Disable features you don't use because those can open up risk as well. And at work, and I shouldn't say just at work, but working at home, never connect a smart device to your network or your work computer unless it has been approved by management. And don't be that person that gets called up by IT for uploading some kind of malware because you unwittingly connected a smart device to your network that had malware in it. So moving on to working remotely, challenges. Obviously, these are more general concerns than cybersecurity, but keeping employees productive, obviously very important. How productive have you been? Have you been inconsistent, erratic hours? I have 3 kids. As you know, I have pets. My wife works at home too. It's been tough, especially during school with online learning and the kids demanding iPads or trying to work with my computer or my cell phone if theirs isn't working, just to be connected. And that's kind of the perfect storm for hackers and cyber criminals because people are a little distracted and you're letting people use computers, cell phones, that sort of thing that shouldn't really be using them. I've been trying to be productive, but it's definitely been a little bit more erratic than working in the office. Are voice and collaboration services reliable? That's been an issue. Connection with voice collaboration services, even Zoom. If you don't have a right connection, sometimes your Zoom meetings fail, and that can be embarrassing. Are key applications and services accessible? Again, that depends on your connections and your IT's ability to provide those key applications and services to you remotely. And is the right data accessible to the right people and no one else? So IT can restrict access to certain things, which might be smart to do and when we're working remotely and narrowing the things that employees can otherwise access. Working remotely, challenges continued. Are your VPN endpoints and critical applications protected from DDoS attacks? And those are denial of service attacks, which in shorthand is when your machine, your network is flooded with superfluous emails that overwhelm it and slow down service, rendering your network or your machine unavailable for you to use. In the time of COVID-19, users may be encouraged, for example, to click on CDC websites or World Health Organization, WHO, URLs. This is, maybe you've experienced some fatigue, as I have over the last 4 months, in clicking on these kind of websites to see what the latest statistics are, whether curves are flattening, what number of tests have been performed, that sort of thing. But if you do click on some of these websites that are sent to you unsolicited, they may redirect you to a phishing site from which cyber criminals may obtain, let's say, your Outlook usernames and passwords from unsuspecting users. Simply don't click on it if it looks suspicious. Other challenges, is the network robust enough to support all employees working from home? Sometimes it isn't. VPNs obviously are recommended. That's the virtual private network, sort of using the public network to do your private business. Is IT able to provide enough VPN capacity? That could be an issue. Are help desks and contact centers coping with this pressure? And I add this note, are you civil to your help desks? Because sometimes those help desks are also remote, virtual. The people helping you are at home dealing with their own challenges. And I think civility is very important in getting the answers you need and the help you require. without offending anybody and without perhaps miscommunicating. Spiking cybersecurity risks. Working at home, obviously it's a more casual workplace. I'm wearing a tie and collared shirt, but I'm sure there are many of you that are watching from home, maybe in your pajamas, maybe in relaxed, a much more relaxed setting with music playing, things that you wouldn't be doing if you were actually in the workplace. And just being casual can sort of let down your guard. And when you're stressed out, you can end up clicking on things that you might not otherwise click on, or if you're fearing certain things regarding the pandemic, you might click on things that you might not otherwise click on. Distractions, we've already talked about those, kids, dogs, constant news cycles, trying to deal with, keep in touch with your family members. All these things can increase traffic from external sources into the network you're using. And then there are the employees, hopefully you're not one of them, that try to work around efforts that your IT department is trying to put in place to prevent cybersecurity risk. Try to use your VPNs. Don't try to do things that are not recommended by your IT department. So some of the lures and cyber risks, I talked about denial of service, where your network might be flooded by denial of service attack, which could render your network unavailable for a period of time. Inadvertent disclosures, this is, again, email, texting. If it is 24 hours a day, you're even in bed doing it, you might inadvertently disclose something through your texting or your email messages. So keep that in mind. Malware, that's been around for a while. Spoofing and phishing, where cyber criminals and hackers are trying to disguise who they are by simulating somebody or something like an entity, like your bank, that you know, and trying to convince you, persuade you to open up their email link. Don't do it. Ransomware, hopefully you're never a victim of ransomware attack where your system can be locked up and you will not be able to open it unless you provide some kind of Bitcoin or some other kind of compensation to open it up. Just general things. A lot of these cyber criminals are working from outside the country. So keep an eye out for typos, domain names that don't seem to make sense to you, because that might give you a clue that they are non-legitimate emails, texts, or links. Current threat profile, the old enterprise email volumes, emails just, there's just so much email. It's hard not to go throughout the day without clicking on and opening up, tens, hundreds of emails. Just trying to make it through that volume is hard, and to keep vigilant. And then routine generic scams, they've been around for a long time. But the new risks are very smart COVID-19 social engineering, where when you have the distracted employees, they might be looking at very specific COVID-19 emails or texts regarding office reopenings, loans, PPP loans, CARE loans, CARES program. So the spoofing and the phishing is becoming much more sophisticated, where it does seem like it's coming from your IT department, or perhaps a supervisor, or perhaps your bank, asking you to update your confidential passwords, usernames, that sort of thing. So just be careful. And I also mentioned that, although this is a little bit more specific to COVID-19, the George Floyd incident and the protests that followed, the Black Lives Movement, has also increased the amount of cyber risk, because that in itself leads people to click on things regarding protests in their neighborhood, fears, anxieties related to systemic racism. So be aware of that as well because that in itself is social engineering, where it's basically psychological manipulation. VPN's, current threat profile continued. Work from home, workforce, like I said, VPNs are critical. Increase in personal email is something else to be aware of, because you're contacting a lot of people that aren't at the office either, trying to arrange calls with family, that sort of thing. IT help desks are far away. Like I said, it's hard to not call up, be in the office and not call up IT. And if you can't figure something out, they will come down or remote in. Chances are they can remote in still, but sometimes that face-to-face in-office experience is a lot more effective than remote assistance. And then DDoS, the denial of service impacts, can be very serious. So how do you manage this threat profile? Mandate, if possible, that workers use company-owned computers and sign into the VPN network. Remind employees that policies regarding the proper use of company technology are still in effect and enforceable while they are working remotely. Hopefully you have some policies. If not, you should create them, and make sure most employment agreements would include this, where employees should know that they can be monitored, what they're doing on the internet. And even, I mean, this happens a lot with privilege, which is what I deal with oftentimes in litigation discovery, where employees can email from their work computer using their work email addresses, let's say a lawyer, about some kind of workplace dispute. Well, that no longer is privilege, because there's no expectation of privacy, because you've already signed away your privacy rights in your employment agreement. So just be aware that, or the employees should be aware that what they're doing on their work computers at home on the workplace network should be monitored and will be monitored, and discipline can ensue if things are being done that compromise the security of those networks. Other things to keep in mind, internet-based meetings, a lot of them are Zoom. That's what I've been doing, or GoToMeeting. To the extent possible, try to utilize available features to set a password for the meeting and only distribute the password to intended participants, and not posting the password in a public forum. I'm sure by now you've all seen those Zoom issues where pornography is shown during a Zoom meeting. Just be careful with Zoom in particular. The Zoom has tried to ameliorate some of the security issues, but there's always a chance that somebody is going to be a participant that shouldn't be, and you should be always vigilant as to who's actually listening in, because you might not want to disclose certain things to a non-invited member. Monitor and review access logs for detection of unusual activity. Again, if there's concerns about certain employees, review the access logs for those employees. You might be able to have a program that lists the risks of certain unusual activity. Remind your employees not to use public Wi-Fi and to routinely change their password on their home Wi-Fi. I mean, that's something that we don't do as much as we should. The workplace environment is a little bit more up to speed on changing passwords. We're required in our law firm to change them pretty regularly. Hopefully you have the same thing at your work computers. But also keep in mind your home Wi-Fi, because that's chances are what you're working on now. and you can be hacked if your passwords aren't changed on a regular basis. Create unique, strong passwords for all accounts. Are easy to remember, but hard to guess. That's been an issue with our kids' online instruction. For some reason, they set their passwords without us knowing, and then we can't find exactly what their password was. Easy to remember, hard to guess. Enable multi-factor authentication whenever possible, and use situational awareness when traveling or working remotely. Maybe you're not in public as much as you used to be, but use things like privacy screens, or just be aware of what you're doing. On airplanes, it happens all the time where you're sitting next to somebody, you can see exactly what they're doing on their computer. And if you're really interested, you could probably figure out what some of their passwords are. So just be aware. Limit your users' rights and permissions with the principle of need to know. Scrutinize and question, in particular, third-party software or telework vendors. You might be using them already, or you might be vetting others. While you continue teleworking, who knows when schools are going to open. My kids are up in Ozaki County, so their school is actually going to be open 5 days a week. But who knows where you are? If there's online instruction, chances are you're going to be working or teleworking for a lot longer. So if you are vetting new vendors, just ensure that critical security controls are not compromised by any new software. The FBI regularly reports that malicious cyber actors may be using legitimate-looking telework software, which may be offered for free or at a reduced price, to gain access to sensitive data or eavesdrop on conversations. In addition, cyber actors may also use phishing links or malicious mobile applications that appear to come from legitimate telework software vendors. So don't let the Trojan horse into your network thinking that it's a legitimate teleworking vendor. Government warnings. So the FBI urges vigilance during the COVID-19 pandemic, and has been for several months now. They've set up a website, FBI.gov/coronavirus, which I was going to show you or try to share with you, but my own concerns of violating my own privacy and perhaps violating privilege of my clients kind of dissuaded me from doing so, because when you share your screen during a Zoom meeting, sometimes if you're not careful, you can end up sharing more than you're planning to. And then all of a sudden, people are seeing what you're doing, perhaps see personal email and things that might compromise your own security. So in the abundance of caution and I guess distrusting my own ability to adeptly connect to the website, I'm just going to list the website here, FBI.gov/coronavirus. So that lists a ton of recent opportunities the pandemic has created for cyber criminals. It's almost a daily tally of what cyber criminals are doing in terms of trying to hack into your network. But just a few examples, some of the more prominent trends. Government agency scams in particular, there's a long list of phishing campaigns against first responders, denial of service, attacks against government agencies that prevent government agencies from helping out those in most need at critical junctures, fake COVID-19 websites that if you click on them, they download malware to your devices if you're a victim. So those are some of the things that the FBI has alerted you to on that website. The FCC is also pretty good about tracking COVID-19 consumer scams. That website is fcc.gov/COVID-scams. And they're a little bit, I guess I shouldn't say better, but they focus a little bit more on tech scams impersonating government agencies. We've been talking a lot about emails, but the FCC has reported on a lot of tech scams where texts claim to be coming from government agencies or call centers offering lots of money for COVID-19 relief. These texts are disguised attempts, phishing attempts to get banking or other personal information from potential victims. Better Business Bureau also is a good resource to refer to in warning about text message scams where these text cyber criminals are trying to impersonate as in this case, the US Department of Health and Human Services, let's say about new vaccines that are being developed, when are they going to be developed, and how to test yourself, perhaps at home. There's always a new gimmick that people are touting as to how to figure out if you have COVID or not. So if you see something that there's, especially if you use the word mandatory, that there's some kind of link that allows you to test for whether you have COVID, be aware. Reminders, one thing you should do when you hover over a link, or when you get a link, hover over the link with your cursor and you'll see the full URL, and that might tip you off as to whether it's a legitimate website. Click with caution always. Keep devices up to date. If you do have updates that are automatic, enable them, because those updates can protect and increase your security settings. Follow organizational policies, which sort of goes without saying, but sometimes people need to be reminded what those organizational policies are. Ask questions when unsure of something, and report all security incidents immediately. Even if you think you did something that's embarrassing, that's going to lead to discipline, covering it up only makes matters worse. And usually it's pretty easy to figure out what the source of the threat was, what the source of the infiltration was. So just report it as soon as you see something that has compromised your security. So surviving a breach. So let's say you do have a breach in your network. Timing, how quickly was the response? Don't put your head in the sand. Communication, you should start thinking about how you're going to communicate that breach as soon as you find out about it. How well did you communicate with all the stakeholders, regulators, the public, anybody that was affected? Make sure those communications are vetted. You can start drafting them right away, but oftentimes it's scores of drafts are needed, because sometimes you panic a little bit. You think you know what actually happened, but until you get a forensic investigator to see what the breach was, what the scope of the breach was, who was affected, you don't want to be Chicken Little and say everybody in the county was affected by the data breach, because that's going to just overwhelm your phone system, and it might not even be true. And then people will be concerned that you don't have an incident response plan in place that is valid and that's actually protecting county residents. So US law regarding data breaches, all 50 states have their own. They're somewhat similar in terms of notification of the stakeholders and the people affected, but they're all somewhat different. And I'm not talking about Wisconsin specifically, because I'll talk about a case study in a little bit later where a state agency was hacked, and it's just not Wisconsin residents that were affected. It was an online store. It was of the agency. 49 states had residents that were affected, and a dozen plus countries, residents of other countries were affected. So, and those, it depends on where the individual is that had their whatever sensitive data stolen, that those laws are the ones that define what kind of notification measures you need to take. So legal issues can vary by jurisdiction. They can be somewhat fragmented. Some are break things down between business interests, consumer interests. Some state governments are a little bit, have different policy directives. Personal information, usually defined as pretty narrow. Few transfer restrictions. That's not the case in Europe, which is more strict, where data privacy is a right and personal information is more broadly defined. So even if you think it's ordinary, non-sensitive, if you do have, in the, I can't say unlikely event because we are so globalized. If you do have a data breach and someone, especially in Europe, is affected, make sure you know what those notification laws are in Europe. Specific US laws, as I mentioned, apply to the individual where that individual resides, even if the breach occurs in another state. Certain industries are regulated by federal law, healthcare in particular, HIPAA. HIPAA is a federal statute, but most states have their own version of HIPAA for private health information. But some industries, it's again very specific. What is the personal data elements that are exposed? Make sure you know what is exposed, because it could be social security numbers, driver's license numbers, financial account numbers, username, passwords for online accounts, insurance, passport numbers, and biometrics. All these are looked at differently depending on the federal law and state laws that are in application. Legal issues vary by data category. As I mentioned, personal health information, very regulated. Especially in terms of counties where there are joint agreements between counties and sharing, or with the state too, in sharing health information of not just the residents of your county, but others. Some of these data breaches involving PHI, personal health information, can be very big. Regarding non-public financial information, that's personal. The GLBA, FTC regulations, some state laws have differing requirements as to what needs to be done if there is a data breach. And then finally, wanted to mention that we've sort of been talking about cyber criminals, hackers, outside sources getting into your computer networks. I do want to caution you, though, that there could be insiders. I've been involved in plenty of investigations where people have, within county government, have tried to inspect other people's emails, Outlook systems, with spyware, surveillance programs, maybe not even that sophisticated. But in those cases, if you are an insider, that doesn't mean that you should be viewing, let's say, personal health information, because that in itself is a breach, even if you're part of the same organization of the person that has that PHI. So just a word of caution. Personal information of minors, something else to be aware of. Ordinary personally identifiable information. It's a little weaker. FTC Consumer Protection Authority sometimes can apply if it's just even your personal home address. So examining security, people. We've discussed, excuse me, COVID phishing campaigns. Excuse me, COVID malicious web. COVID malicious websites. Home networks are now part of your enterprise network. I guess it's somewhat repetitive. I'm not going to go into detail with those. Excuse my cough. I have a little cough, but not COVID, I believe. Process, how to work remotely, how to verify identities. That can be an issue for your IT department as well. Technology, VPN, remote control for support, web meetings, and social media. US law, owner versus licensee or user. In practice, the owner looks to the licensee or user to take the lead to notify the individuals. Often data security provisions are included in vendor contracts. In some instances, the law requires it. Costs associated with a breach. Outside legal counsel. That would be me. I have been retained to provide outside legal counsel. Forensic investigators can be somewhat costly as well. Notification, mailing of letters can be very costly depending on the size of the breach. Public relations, you might get a PR firm to help you manage the anxiety and distress of the people that were affected by the breach. Call center, something else that might be required or recommended depending on the size of the breach, and to make sure that the victims are notified or have access to information, because if they're frustrated, then they might take legal action. And then ransom, as we mentioned, if there is ransomware and your computers are frozen, it might end up costing you a lot of money to unfreeze those capabilities. Other costs associated with breach. Credit monitoring, ID theft protection, that's often what is offered if there is a data breach, because then people can see if their information, their credit card information is being used in an unauthorized way. But other costs, business interruption, regulatory investigation, litigation, sorry, that's my dog. If you hear her, she's probably barking at rabbits outside. Litigation, plaintiffs' firms, especially class action firms, love a big data breach. And if they see that it's sizable, more than a few thousand, then it might be worth their while to file a class action. Contractual disputes with business partners, reputational harm, other costs, maybe non-quantifiable, but those are costs. Preparing for a breach. Assume you may not have access to your network or email for a while if you do have a breach. In that case, you should always print and pull key documents such as incident response plans, contact information, insurance policies. Preparing for a breach, clearly communicate remote working do's and don'ts. Just train and keep on training your employees. Increase logging and monitoring of the employees, and turn on, if you have it, multi-factor authentication. Update your remote working policies, or create one if you don't have one. Be specific, because the employees want guidance. They don't want to get in trouble. Create a clear mechanism for reporting security issues. Phishing exercises, let's say, I mean, a lot of entities do that. My law firm does it. Let's say a fake Dropbox email that asks you to update your Dropbox credentials. It's fine if you click on them. I mean, you learn by negative example. It's a lot better to click on a fake one than a real one. So you learn not to click on them. Over communicate regarding these cybersecurity risks, and ensure policies, trainings in place when it comes to wire transfers, because that's where you could end up losing a lot of money if your wire transfers are compromised. Other things to do in preparing for a breach: identify an incident response team in advance. Keep it small enough to be manageable. Key business leaders, you normally have corporation counsel, communications, operations, finance. Identify a project leader, but keep the team on task. Develop an incident response plan and try to keep it simple. 3 to 5 pages is probably sufficient. Have all the contacts, internal and external resources. Have an idea of what laws apply, and identify what timing requirements are necessary to regulators, business partners, and others. Activate the response team when there is a breach. Set up regular calls. Another thing to keep in mind: discourage communication in writing early on, because sometimes there's speculation, inaccurate information that's being shared. And sometimes those emails, those drafts, can spark alarm and unnecessary concern among stakeholders and perhaps state and federal agencies that work on cybersecurity, including the DOJ. So limit writings to just the facts, if you can confirm them, not rumor or gossip or guesses. Outline expectations of confidentiality, who's to know what is being investigated regarding the breach, and then identify who's actually making the final decisions. Is it your IT director? If so, who is he or she consulting with? But basics in responding to a breach: what actually happened, the type of the breach, is the incident ongoing? Because if it is, you got to stop it. That's the first priority. When did it begin and end? That can be a very important consideration, because the longer the breach goes on, chances are the more people you're going to have to notify. If you can narrow that time frame as to when the breach ended or began and ended, you won't have to notify as many people, and the fines will be less. What information was potentially exposed? How many people could be impacted? And I'm referring to companies, but in terms of counties, where is the data actually processed? It might maybe not even be in your county. Who owns the data? And who knows about the breach? Does media know? It's often best to get ahead of what the media is going to report. Regulators, law enforcement, when there's a breach involving public health or personal health information in the state of Wisconsin, it's not uncommon to have 20 people on the call from DOA, DOJ, the governor's legal counsel. I mean, it's really incredible how many people have a stake in learning about a breach and remediating. Do you have cyber insurance? If not, if you're self-insured, I mean, that's something you might consider. Will the insurer, if you have cyber insurance, let you choose your own providers? Do you have a data protection officer? If not, maybe you should consider having one. And if you've had a data breach in the past, maybe use the same vendors if you had success with them, or maybe vet some new ones. Investigation and remediation: retain outside the breach legal counsel. Regarding the investigation, it's often good to have a lawyer involved, because as you develop the facts and investigate what happened, there is some privilege that can cloak drafts of the investigation report. Sometimes that's not absolute. Sometimes the entities might waive privilege and make the report public. But if lawyers are involved, you have that opportunity to keep some things privileged. Utilize contacts, resources, including for ransomware attacks. There are negotiators out there that can help you work with the ransomware cyber criminals. some of these are somewhat repetitive, so I'll go to notification, and let's see where I am on time. We've been close to 15 minutes. So let me talk about a case study. I'm not going to use a county as an example. I won't name names. It was a government agency that had realized through people that contacted it from their online store that when they were trying to buy things on the online store, they were getting messages that virus alerts, malware alerts, and once they received multiple comments from their vendors regarding these alerts, they did realize that there was a malicious JavaScript that had been loaded onto their e-commerce platform, which allowed the cyber criminal who's located outside of state to skim credit card data. And that happened for some time. Wasn't clear exactly. We got a forensic investigator to try to determine who was affected. We kind of narrowed it down to a certain number of days, certain number of people that had purchased things online. And based on that, notifications went out. Like I said, these, I think I mentioned before, that in this case, almost every state in the country and a dozen plus countries had residents that were affected by this breach. So we got a vendor to work with in sending out the notification letters throughout the country and to countries elsewhere in the world. It's not that expensive. You can get quotes. You can also get the quotes from forensic investigators. Data breaches, although unwelcome, are very prevalent. So there is competition out there between the vendors. So it need not be incredibly expensive. But at the end of the day, we notified everybody. Fortunately, there was no lawsuit, and they remedied things. In terms of this slide that I'm showing you now, post-breach. Well, what do you do after everything's done? Well, you talk to the incident response team, discuss what went well, what could have done better, or what could have gone better. Were there criticisms? Should the incident response plan be updated? And it's time to reveal lessons learned. Social engineering regarding COVID-19 phishing and spoofing scams are on the rise, as I've mentioned. Cyber hygiene, always stress that with employees. Compliance is not on hold. Invest in training and consider post-pandemic changes to practices. Preparedness, I already went through the case study, and I think if Chelsea can confirm, we are at the end of our program. So I'd like to thank you for joining us remotely. And I wish I could be there in person, maybe in years in the future. I will be able to be invited back to the WCA Educational Center.
Absolutely.
So be safe, enjoy the rest of the summer, and I look forward to you improving your cybersecurity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as always, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. Thanks, everyone.